It starts on what should be an uneventful afternoon across the Central Plains. The sky is calm, a clear stretch of blue from horizon to horizon, until a faint shadow forms in the distant west. At first it looks like an approaching line of storms, but the shape is wrong. There are no flashes of lightning, no towering thunderheads. Instead, the horizon darkens into a solid, rising wall, an advancing mass of airborne earth driven by powerful winds. As it grows, it becomes clear that this is not an ordinary weather front. It is a massive dust storm, the kind meteorologists classify as a large-scale haboob, capable of swallowing cities and smothering daylight in minutes. When the storm arrives, it does not feel sudden, yet it hits with overwhelming force. Wind gusts surpassing roughly 60 miles per hour push the dust forward like a moving cliff of soil, gravel, and pulverized topsoil ripped from dry fields. The moment the front reaches populated areas, daylight collapses. Streets, neighborhoods, and farm roads are thrown into near total darkness as visibility drops to only a few feet. Anyone caught outside is immediately disoriented, reduced to seeing only their hands in front of their face, the air thick with choking grit. Within moments, panic ripples across highways as drivers lose all sense of direction. Headlights become useless beams scattered by swirling particles, forcing motorists to halt wherever they are, on shoulders, in lanes, or even in the middle of intersections. Emergency dispatchers are inundated with calls, reporting stalled vehicles, lost drivers, and minor collisions caused by the blinding conditions. As the sun disappears behind the storm's towering edge, the temperature begins to drop. Without direct sunlight, large areas can experience a rapid decline in heat, potentially falling by 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit in under an hour. The air becomes noticeably cooler, adding a sharp bite to the already suffocating atmosphere. Inside homes and businesses, lights flicker on automatically, but they do little to cut through the swirling blackness outside. The abrasive sound of dust scraping against windows and metal siding replaces the usual daytime noise. Even those safely indoors begin to sense that something unprecedented is unfolding. The reality sinks in. This is not a passing dust plume or a short-lived weather oddity. This is the beginning of a regional blackout created entirely by earth and wind. And in this first hour, before systems fail, before agriculture suffers, before the long-term consequences set in, the plains find themselves plunged into a darkness so complete and so immediate that millions of people struggle to understand what has just happened. As the darkness stretches beyond the first hour, the disaster shifts from a terrifying atmospheric event to a full-scale systems crisis. The storm does not weaken, instead it spreads, covering hundreds of miles of open land and densely populated areas. Across the plains, one of the earliest major failures begins in the energy sector. Many states in this region rely on large solar installations for a meaningful share of daytime electricity. When the dust wall arrives, those facilities go dark instantly. Panels that normally absorb sunlight are now trapped beneath layers of gritty sediment, producing virtually no power. This rapid collapse of solar generation happens at the exact moment millions of people are switching on lights, air purifiers, and emergency devices to cope with the darkness. The grid suddenly faces a dual stressor, a steep loss in energy supply paired with a sharp spike in demand. While grid operators can draw from reserve sources or activate natural gas plants, the shift is abrupt enough that rolling blackouts begin to appear in scattered communities. These outages deepen the confusion and make communication difficult as cell towers and small substations begin operating on backup power. Meanwhile, the air itself is becoming more hazardous by the minute. Dust storms of this magnitude carry extremely fine particulate matter known as PM 2.5, particles small enough to bypass the body's natural defenses and settle deep in the lungs. Even those indoors are not fully protected. Modern buildings with high-efficiency filtration can reduce exposure, but many homes across rural parts of the plains rely on basic HVAC systems that cannot stop microscopic particles. As filters clog, indoor air quality drops sharply, forcing people to seal windows and door frames with towels or plastic to slow the infiltration of dust. Hospitals and clinics begin to see a rise in respiratory distress cases. For people with asthma, chronic lung conditions, or compromised immune systems, prolonged exposure to airborne dust can trigger dangerous inflammation. While today's medical understanding is far better than during the Dust Bowl era, the health risk remains very real, and medical facilities must quickly ration masks, inhalers, and oxygen supplies. Transportation networks also falter. Highways remain gridlocked or temporarily shut down as visibility stays near zero. Rail operations slow dramatically because train engineers cannot safely navigate through opaque, dust-filled air, and sensors along tracks begin to malfunction due to grit accumulation. Air travel across the region is suspended altogether, as airports have no safe runway visibility and aircraft engines cannot operate reliably in the abrasive storm. By the 12th hour, the dust storm has exposed how interdependent modern systems truly are. One environmental shock has already begun to strain power, transportation, healthcare, and communication networks, and while the storm will eventually weaken, the cascading failures it triggers are only beginning to unfold. By the third day, the storm has evolved into something less violent but far more unsettling. The towering wall of dust is no longer sweeping across the plains at full force, yet the sky is still shrouded in a dense reddish-brown haze. Sunlight manages to push through in faint, muted bands, creating an eerie twilight that lingers from morning to evening. Although the immediate danger of complete blackout has passed, this sustained dimming introduces a new set of challenges that grow more serious with each passing hour. Agriculture, one of the defining features of the plains, starts to show visible signs of stress. Crops like corn, wheat, and soybeans depend heavily on consistent sunlight for photosynthesis, and the prolonged haze limits the amount of solar energy they can absorb. Scientific studies have shown that high concentrations of airborne particulate matter can reduce the amount of available sunlight by a significant percentage, which in turn decreases crop productivity. Even short disruptions can cause measurable losses. For farmers already operating on tight seasonal windows, a multi-day reduction in light and a layer of abrasive dust covering leaves can jeopardize their entire year's yield. Livestock operations face their own problems. Dust settling on open water sources increases contamination risk, and grazing lands are coated with sediment that animals can inhale or ingest. Many ranchers are forced to relocate cattle into sheltered areas, if available, to reduce exposure. Although modern veterinary care helps mitigate some dangers, prolonged dust inhalation can still cause respiratory irritation and reduced feeding. Transportation remains heavily restricted. The storm's lingering haze drastically limits visibility for aircraft, keeping many regional airports grounded. On highways, blowing dust and leftover drifts continue to create hazards, especially in open rural stretches. Rail networks face delays as maintenance crews work to clear dust accumulation from critical track components, sensors, and switches. These disruptions ripple outward, slowing the movement of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Supply chains that rely on predictable schedules begin to unravel. Warehouses depend on timely deliveries, and shortages emerge when trucks and trains fail to move goods efficiently. While businesses and emergency services tap into stored reserves, these supplies were never designed to support long-term regional outages. Communities on the outer edges of the affected zones start to notice reduced availability of essentials, like fresh produce, livestock feed, and replacement air filters. Public health agencies issue new advisories warning residents that PM 2.5 concentrations remain elevated. Even though winds have weakened, fine particles stay suspended in the atmosphere for days due to their extremely small size. Hospitals report a steady growing demand for respiratory treatments, particularly in smaller towns that lack specialized equipment. By the end of the 72-hour mark, the region is caught in a delicate balance. The worst of the storm may have passed, but the lingering haze, damaged crops, strained supply chains, and ongoing health risks reveal how quickly a massive dust event can reshape daily life. The plains are no longer in immediate darkness, yet the path to recovery is already proving far more difficult than anyone expected. By the end of the first week, the massive dust storm has largely passed, but the crisis is far from over. Winds have calmed, yet the air remains filled with fine particulate matter, making outdoor activity hazardous without proper respiratory protection. Even a simple walk outside can expose people to PM 2.5 particles, which penetrate deep into the lungs and aggravate pre-existing conditions such as asthma or chronic bronchitis. Public health warnings continue, emphasizing that staying indoors with sealed ventilation systems is the safest option for most residents. The most visible impact is on the land itself. Dust that was airborne for days is now settling, forming thick layers across streets, farmland, and rural infrastructure. Roads, fences, and farm equipment are buried under a suffocating blanket of soil. Vehicles, tractors, and construction machinery must be cleaned and inspected before they can operate safely, while critical road and rail networks require extensive clearing to resume normal traffic. For many rural communities, small town streets resemble a desert landscape, and the sheer volume of deposited dust overwhelms local cleanup capabilities. Agriculture suffers further setbacks as the accumulated dust covers crops and grazing land. While some plants survive under the layer of sediment, many are stunted, and the potential yield of wheat, corn, and soybeans declines significantly. Soil quality is altered, nutrient-rich topsoil may be stripped from some areas, leaving less fertile ground, while in other locations, the deposited dust adds weight and density that can harm young plants. Livestock, meanwhile, continue to struggle with contaminated water sources and grazing fields, forcing ranchers to implement emergency feeding strategies. The economic fallout begins to compound. Cleaning the dust is costly and labor-intensive. Machinery and vehicles may require repairs from abrasive dust damage, while industrial operations that rely on clean air intake, such as manufacturing plants, face production slowdowns or temporary shutdowns. Hospitals and clinics experience increased patient loads due to respiratory issues, adding pressure to already strained healthcare systems. Insurance claims for property damage, crop loss, and infrastructure repairs mount rapidly, putting additional strain on local and regional resources. Transportation remains challenged despite calmer winds. Airport operations continue to experience delays as residual dust clouds affect visibility. Highways and rural roads, partially buried under silt, impede deliveries of essential goods, slowing the movement of food, fuel, and emergency supplies. Rail systems work to restore functionality, but face delays due to sediment accumulation in critical track areas and mechanical equipment exposed to dust damage. By the seventh day, the massive dust storm has shifted from an immediate threat to a lingering hazard. The air is clearing gradually, yet the economic, environmental, and public health impacts remain severe. The plains are visibly transformed, communities face significant cleanup challenges, and the strain on agriculture, transportation, and healthcare illustrates how a single, prolonged dust storm can leave long-lasting scars across the region. The initial shock has passed, but the path to full recovery is just beginning. 1 month after the dust storm swept across the plains, the skies are finally clearer, but the aftermath is still painfully visible. Communities are coated in a layer of fine dust, both inside homes and on every surface outside. Even after extensive cleanup, residual sediment continues to affect air quality, clogging ventilation systems and forcing ongoing use of protective masks. Many households and businesses are dealing with long-term damage to electronics, machinery, and vehicles that were exposed to abrasive particles. Agriculture is facing the most enduring consequences. Fields that were buried under thick layers of dust have reduced fertility, while crops that survived the storm show delayed growth due to sunlight deprivation and mechanical damage from wind-blown soil. Livestock operations continue to struggle with partially contaminated grazing areas and water sources, forcing farmers to bring in supplementary feed and water for several weeks. These challenges threaten local and regional food supply chains, with economic losses mounting across the heartland. Transportation and logistics remain disrupted. Rural roads, bridges, and rail lines take time to fully reopen, especially in remote communities where sediment accumulation was heaviest. The initial disruption in supply chains has created cascading shortages in grocery stores, fuel depots, and medical facilities, with some smaller towns experiencing scarcity for weeks. Nationally, the economic impact extends beyond the plains as the cost of rebuilding, cleaning, and supplementing lost agricultural output strains regional budgets. The psychological toll on residents is significant. Living through near total darkness, breathing hazardous air, and witnessing the transformation of familiar landscapes into dust-choked wastelands leaves lasting stress. Emergency responders, farmers, and community members alike face months of recovery work testing both physical endurance and mental resilience. The storm becomes a historical benchmark, a reminder of how quickly nature can overwhelm even modern systems and infrastructure. Environmentally, the plains have been altered. Wind and rain following the storm continue to redistribute dust, affecting soil composition in surrounding areas and creating higher vulnerability to erosion in future droughts. While a single event does not recreate the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, it does highlight the potential for human activity and climate conditions to exacerbate natural hazards, leaving the land more fragile than before. By the end of the first month, life slowly returns to a semblance of normalcy, Power grids have stabilized, supply chains are catching up, and air quality gradually improves. Yet the memory of the blackout, the suffocating dust, and the disruptions to daily life remains vivid. This hypothetical scenario underscores that while massive dust storms may seem extreme, their potential to disrupt agriculture, infrastructure, public health, and psychology is real and measurable. The plains have endured the storm, but the lingering shadow serves as a stark warning of nature's immense and often underestimated power.